If you think you have a time management problem, you could have an interruption problem. Interruptions don't just impact productivity. Research shows that they also impact your focus, your decision making, your ability to regulate your emotions and communicate effectively, also your confidence level. And what makes this especially challenging is that a lot of times people think that they're struggling with discipline or productivity, but really the challenge that they're dealing with is the constant cognitive switching. And research shows, and you may have experienced this before, I know I have, that when our attention is pulled away from a task, part of our brain is still focusing, staying with on the previous task. And so we're trying to engage with the new one, but the new task, but our focus is now divided. So we're now splitting our attention. And depending on the complexity of the work, it can take significant time to fully regain the focus and the momentum that you were previously at before the interruption. And this is why sometimes we can stay busy all day, we can work all day and respond to all of the incoming messages and still never reach that deep level of thinking that is required for clear communication, for aligned decision making, and for meaningful progress. And then over time, this starts to impact more than just productivity. It shows up in how we communicate, in how we respond under pressure, in how confident we feel in our decisions, and in how others experience working with us. I was speaking with a client that I recently, and she shared with me that she finally feels like she's above water. And I asked her what she meant. And she said she feels calmer, more in control, and more focused. And then I asked her what changed. And she said she stopped letting everything interrupt her. She started actually keeping her protected time blocks instead of jumping every time somebody pinged her or an email came through. She started creating stronger boundaries around what gets her attention and when. And what was interesting is that she also shared this practice in her professional life is now spilling over, starting to improve her personal life. And it goes both ways because wherever the chaos starts, if it's at home, it tends to follow us at work. If it's at work, well, then it tends to follow us at home. And this is where self-leadership becomes so important because strong leadership starts with self-leadership. When we are doing the constant task switching, then this increases our stress and then we're operating from a reactive mental state. And so maybe, yes, we're responding faster, but the thought is less clear and how we articulate our thoughts is then also less clear because clear thinking requires staying with a problem long enough to actually understand it before going in search of a solution and then communicating the solution. So busy can look productive, but that strategic thinking requires uninterrupted thought. And if our attention is constantly being pulled in multiple directions, well, then it becomes much harder, if not impossible, to access that level of deep thinking. And then eventually we're operating from that reactive state instead of an intentional state. So I'm going to share 3 ways that interruptions can set you back at work or you can apply this in your personal life. So one is what I just talked about, the impact of the loss of clear thinking. And so that's one of the hidden costs of interruptions is we lose the deep thought. Because when we never stay with that problem long enough to fully process it, well, then we're reacting. We're answering quickly and then we're moving on quickly. But strong, aligned decision making often requires sitting with something for longer. I always like to say, sit with the discomfort or focus on the frustration. This is how you get to the root issue, and that's the way that you solve the problem. And you will often surprise yourself by how quickly you can surface a solution to what have been persistent problems just by sitting and focusing on the problem and thinking deeper on it. But when we never give ourselves that protected time for focused thinking, and then we end up constantly responding to noise instead of what is actually meaningful, solving those meaningful problems. So that's the first cost of interruptions. And then the second is lack of ability or lowered ability to properly regulate your emotions. Because when we're constantly interrupted, well, this naturally increases your frustration, shortens your patience, and then you're working with a more cognitive overload. And when we're mentally overloaded, naturally our communication quality tends to decline. So we're more reactive and we're less intentional. And other people feel that. Your team feels that immediately. And research also shows that emotional states and communication patterns influence team dynamics and workplace behavior. So, if a leader is operating from a place of scattered attention where everything's urgent, constant reactivity, well, that energy becomes normalized and it spreads throughout the team. And then that's the third cost, or brings me to the third cost of interruptions, is that people model what they see. And this is from research on social learning and behavioral social learning theory and behavioral modeling. People tend to mirror the behavior patterns around them, especially from leaders. So if the leader's in a constant state of letting themselves get, or practicing letting themselves get interrupted, this becomes normalized. Constant interruption becomes normalized, and then the team starts to operate that way too. And then this is a challenge that leaders will often share with me, and that is, if everything feels urgent, if everything is urgent, nothing is urgent, and so nothing is getting the attention that it actually deserves. And this is where confusion across teams can increase, because instead of prioritizing, people are reacting. And then communication is less clear and decision making is less aligned. And eventually, what can look like a performance issue is actually a clarity issue, because clarity creates confidence. Think about, if you are unsure of the end goal or of the ask, well, then how confident are you in your ability to complete the task? You're busy trying to interpret what the task is rather than getting started executing. And research in organizational psychology supports that as well, that people perform better when confidence with more confidence when expectations are clear. And this is one of the strongest predictors of employee engagement. Very simple, just I know what is expected of me at work. Think about how difficult it is to communicate clearly when your attention is getting constantly interrupted. Then what happens is it's harder to gather your thoughts, which makes it harder to prioritize. You start to question yourself. It's harder to regulate your emotions. It's harder to really listen. And then it's harder from there to make aligned decisions. So if we constantly allow interruptions to dominate our day, then this becomes the operating environment, and it's unintentionally then the norm for the rest of the team and others around us. All right, so that's the challenge of interruptions, the impact that constant interruptions can have on leaders and teams. So what are some steps that what do we do about this? What are some steps that you can put into action immediately, starting today or tomorrow with the first one? And the first one is, strong leadership starts with self-leadership. And so that's how you want to start the day, with self-leadership, because strong communication, clear decision making, this needs to happen long before the high pressure moment. It starts with how you begin your day. If you're not starting your day from a place of calm, collected thoughts and prioritizing what's meaningful for you to tackle that day, and the ability to check in with yourself and focus, how likely will you be to gather your thoughts and feel confident in your decisions and communicate them clearly when the pressure is on later in the workday? So strong leadership starts with self-leadership, and this is how you want to begin your day. And focus on what you can do rather than what you can't do. 15 minutes to yourself to check in and sit quietly and think and give yourself some time to focus. Then start with 5. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes of protected, quiet thinking time first thing in the morning makes a huge difference. So no emails, no reacting to anything, no phones. Just check in with yourself before you let yourself get into all of the stresses that are still on your plate from the day before. And you don't want to start your day with that immediate reactive thinking, like waking up and grabbing your phone and checking an email. Just some space to yourself to sit, to think, to check in with how you're feeling, with what you're thinking about, and to prioritize what's the one task that is going to help you move the needle, make the biggest impact, or move toward that day. And then that's your protected focused time block. And if you can decide that first thing in the morning when things are calm, then you're more likely to stick with that throughout the day and stick with your protecting your time block that you prioritized. Because if you don't take control of your day, first thing in the morning, your day is going to end up controlling you. And this is when we start reacting and operating from more of a place of stress rather than calm, aligned actions. And then whatever feels, then you're responding to just whatever feels urgent rather than what's most meaningful. So that's the first thing. Start your day with some self-leadership and some quiet, focused time to sit with yourself, to check in and to think. And then the second is to stop rewarding interruption culture, because not every message requires an immediate response, and not every quick question ends up being quick. And when you stop, that's one of the most important things you can do, because remember, your team is modeling your behavior. Whatever is normalized, well, that becomes the expectation. So we want to stop rewarding that constant interruption expectation. People learn how to approach us through our behavior. So if you're stopping everything, or what you're focusing on every time a message comes in, well, now that becomes the expectation. So you want to start setting boundaries there. And it's easier to do. It's not easy to do. It becomes easier the more you practice it. But it's easier if you start by deciding on what you're going to prioritize first thing in the morning as part of your self-leadership. And setting a boundary, yes, it can feel uncomfortable at first. If it's not something that you're used to doing, it likely will feel uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be aggressive. It can be very simple. You can say something like, yes, I will get back with you on that tomorrow. Or absolutely, we need to connect on that. Send me a few times that work for you later this week, and we'll get it on the calendar. So this way it's just a redirecting boundary. And this way you're protecting your protected time. And this is prioritizing. So protecting your attention, this is important because it allows you to think more clearly, communicate more clearly, and make more aligned decisions. If you stop what you're doing and you head into that meeting that you just got pinged for that maybe could wait, remember, part of your focus is going to be distracted because it's back on the task that you were attempting to focus on. And then the third tip that you can put into practice today is a simple framework. And as far as an example, I'll give you an example of what this looks like in action. So protecting your attention, how you start to do this when maybe it's something you're not accustomed to is first, well, here's the framework. It's pause, acknowledge, clarify, and lead. You can use this in boundary setting, which is part of protecting your focus, which is what we're, of course, talking about today. But this is a really simple tool that you can use during moments where you feel the pressure. So that pressure is going to feel like resistance. You're focused on your task. The ping comes in, the interruption comes in. You're going to feel something. Well, you want to pause and let yourself actually feel that discomfort, feel that resistance. So first pause and then acknowledge. Let yourself feel the feeling. Don't just move past it. And this really only takes a moment, like 1 or 2 seconds, to pause, acknowledge the resistance, and then clarify, either to the person that is reaching out to you, causing the interruption, or internally with yourself. Okay, clarify. All right, does this meeting need my attention right now? I said I was going to focus on this. This is my protected time block. And then guide the next step from there with likely a redirecting boundary. So you just want to pause before reacting. And then you want to acknowledge the request or the emotion that you're feeling, that discomfort, that resistance that's showing up. And then clarify priorities, timing, and then redirect with the next step intentionally, instead of immediately switching tasks and abandoning what we're focusing on. And then this will help you to respond more intentionally and with a clearer, sharper focus when it is time to move on to that next task. And then over time, this is going to change your internal state and how others learn to communicate with you. So if interruptions are dominating your day, ask yourself what you actually have control over, because we don't have control over the interruptions coming in. We don't have control over everything around us, but we do have control over ourselves and influence over our own boundaries, our own attention, our own communication, how we respond, when we respond. And then once you start creating greater awareness around these choices, well, then you can make different choices. If you notice that you've been feeling a bit overwhelmed and underwater, well, are you stopping and letting distractions interrupt your protected time? Okay, well then what's a different choice that you can make? You can start with the framework. pause, acknowledge, clarify, and then lead the next step there. All right, so quick recap. You want to start your day with self-leadership and protected thinking time. And the more you do this, if you start with 5 minutes, you will notice you'll get more comfortable with it, and that time will grow into 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour sometimes. And taking that time, even though it feels like you're losing time, it's going to give you time back later because you're going to achieve more with less effort because you're thinking more clearly. And the second action step that you can start today is to stop rewarding the interruption culture. Model the behavior of healthier communication, focus, boundaries around protected time for focused thinking, protected time blocks. And then you can practice the framework: pause, acknowledge, clarify, lead. This way you're listening to yourself, that instinct that's showing up as resistance when your protected time is getting interrupted. Because when your attention becomes more intentional, then you're going to naturally communicate clearer, and the quality of your decisions is going to be stronger. And then your confidence increases, and then the confidence of your team increases because they have the clear expectation. So that's going to improve team trust as well. My name's Amy Miller. I work with leaders and teams on clear communication, decision-making, leadership presence, and addressing issues like this that quietly impact performance and alignment inside organizations. And if this is something that you and or your team are currently navigating and you'd like to go deeper, message me, coach, or workshop, and we can continue the conversation. And you can also check out my books, courses, and workshops at amyleemiller.com. Thank you for watching. That's it for this one. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.